Berlin, 1965. A corpse pulled from the spree looked too familiar. I knew that face. Everyone in Langley did. Andrei Sokolov, the Soviet agent who died in Minsk 6 months before. Except he didn't. This isn't a story about chasing someone. It's about helping him vanish again. And if I'm finally telling it, it's not for justice. It's because I'm tired of waking up to the sound of water and seeing his face in it. Before I regret saying any of this, subscribe, drop a comment with your city and time. Let's see who else still listens when the dead speak. The call came just before dawn. Local police said they'd found another body. In the River Mail, mid-30s, floating near Schilling Bridge. Nothing unusual about that in Berlin. The spree's always been good at swallowing names. I grabbed my coat, still damp from last night's rain, and lit a cigarette I didn't really want. The van was already running outside, and the fog over the city felt thicker than the silence inside it. Nobody said much on the way there. What was there to say? A body's a body, until it isn't. When we got there, the locals had already hauled him out. The man was laid out under a canvas sheet, water still dripping from the cuffs of his coat. I stepped closer, lifted the edge, and stopped breathing. I knew that face. I'd seen it in a restricted KGB dossier smuggled out of Minsk 9 months earlier. Andrei Sokolov. Dead? Autopsy confirmed. Buried under false credentials. The face under the sheet was bruised, gray, bloated, but it was him. For a moment, I told myself it was just resemblance. A double. Berlin was full of them. But there was something too exact about the jawline. The scar near the left ear. Then I saw it barely there, but real. A faint tick, just under his left eye. It twitched. You ever watch someone fake being dead so well you believe it? Until they forget for half a second? I don't care what the report said. Dead men don't. Twitch. Protocol said we should hand the body over to the morgue and alert HQ. I didn't. I told the sergeant I'd handle it personally. Classification reasons. Cold War protocol. Whatever came to mind first. He shrugged and walked away. No one liked getting too involved anyway. I arranged for the body to be moved to Wedding, an older facility we sometimes used when we didn't want questions asked. I didn't sign any paperwork. I didn't want a trail. Not yet. In the van, I sat next to him. The sheet still covered most of him, but the face was exposed. I studied it in silence, looking for signs. Breathing. A flinch. A slip. Anything. But the twitch didn't return. Still, something inside me wouldn't settle. It wasn't fear. It wasn't suspicion. It was recognition. Not of him, but of what he was doing. Trying to disappear. The streets blurred past, but my mind was stuck. Why fake his death in Minsk, only to resurface in West Berlin months later? Was it intentional? A mistake? A message? I remembered something Carter once said during a whiskey-soaked debrief in '63. The best agents don't run, they dissolve. 1 second they're there, the next ... they're legend. Andrei Sokolov had been many things: interrogator, impersonator, courier. A man without a country, or maybe one too many. His file was thin, too thin. Like someone had scraped off the real story. We pulled up at the facility in Wedding. It was colder inside than out. I helped lift the gurney. His body was limp, heavy, too convincingly dead, but I couldn't shake it. That twitch, that face, that gut feeling. Something was off, and I just walked it into our own hands. The second time I saw him, the sheet had slipped slightly. He was lying there alone in the Wedding morgue, just a hum overhead, fluorescent buzzing like it always did when things were too quiet. I didn't announce myself. I just walked in and stood over him. I don't know what made me lean in close. Real close, but I did. That's when I saw it again. That twitch, left eyelid, barely there, but real. I'd seen it by the river, and now here. That wasn't rigor mortis. That was life. Controlled, calculated, intentional. I stood there frozen. Not because I was scared, though maybe I was, but because I understood what that meant. If he was breathing, even barely, and he was letting me see it, then he wanted to be seen. Or maybe he was slipping. Either way, that single twitch ripped through everything I thought I knew. Sokolov wasn't dead. He was playing dead. And not for us, Protocol said I should report it. Get him reclassified, detained, questioned, scrub it clean of whatever the hell this was. But I didn't. I walked out of that room like I hadn't seen anything. Lit a cigarette with fingers I couldn't feel. Cold air burned my lungs worse than the tobacco did. Somewhere in the city, news anchors were talking about the Warsaw Pact, the Mauer, protests, but no one was talking about the dead man who wasn't. I came back that night. I needed to confirm officially. I said to check intake forms. Bureaucratic. Bullshit. No one stopped me. No one ever does when you look like you belong. But the file ... it was empty. No attending physician. No timestamp. Just a name, scrawled half-legibly. He was in the system, but only barely. Like someone wanted to. Keep him floating in that limbo where no one asks questions. When I opened the door again, the slab was empty. Sokolov was gone. No body, no signs of struggle. Just cold metal and a few drops of water beating across it. And on the floor, folded precisely in half, a piece of paper soaked around the edges, but readable. I picked it up. Thank you for. Looking twice. 5 words. But it felt like a hand on my throat. He knew I saw. And now I knew he knew. That kind of message doesn't come from panic. It comes from someone who understands the value of nuance, of subtlety, of pulling strings in the dark while everyone else gropes for a switch. I sat down on the edge of a chair that wasn't meant for sitting. It creaked. I let it. My mind was running through every possibility. Was he rogue? Was this a drop? A trap? Or was it something worse, something that didn't fit into boxes we'd spent years building? And here's the part I still can't shake. I didn't tell anyone. I kept it, buried it, not out of sympathy, not even out of fear, just ... something deeper. Some dark, tired part of me wanted to see what he was running from. What made a man like that fake his death not once, but twice. Because whatever it was enough to make him risk everything to not go back. And maybe I understood that more than I cared to admit. That night, I stopped being an observer. I didn't file the report. I didn't follow orders. I became part of it, whatever it was. And he knew that too. The game had started, and I wasn't even sure whose side I was on anymore. I went back in the morning, pretending I was there for something else. A signature, an inventory cross-check, a ghost to chase. Anything but the truth. The staff barely looked at me. That's how it worked back then. Keep your badge visible, your voice low, and no one asked why a man with American shoes was walking through German corridors. She was waiting near the cold storage entrance, pale scrubs, darker circles under her eyes. Her name isn't in any report. I won't give it now either. But she'd helped us before, moving files, stalling protocols, handing off names to ghosts in waiting rooms. This time she just looked at me and said, "He's not here." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. We both knew what that meant. We walked back together, slowly, like people headed toward a funeral they weren't sure was real. When she opened the drawer that should have held him, it was empty. Nothing. Not a smudge, not a hair. Just a folded sheet tucked neatly in the corner. Damp. And on the floor, same paper as before, same hand. But this time, The words were sharper, more deliberate. "Thank you for not calling it in." That was for me. For me. She didn't ask questions, just stood there and waited for me to decide what kind of man I wanted to be next. I asked her how he got out. She didn't answer with words, just nodded toward the west stairwell and pressed a small object into my hand. A ring of keys I didn't recognize. Maintenance level. Emergency access. Not exactly public. Not exactly secure. Just hidden enough to matter. I held on to those keys like they were burning through my palm. The city outside was waking up, oblivious. But down here, something had slipped. Through a crack in the concrete. Someone clever enough to die twice. Someone careful enough to leave a thank you note in the morgue. That's not strategy. That's art. She turned to leave. I stopped her. I asked if she'd seen him. Not just the absence, but his face. Alive. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. Once. Slow. That nod changed everything. It confirmed what I already felt, but didn't want to believe. I wasn't chasing a ghost. I was following a man who knew how to erase himself in layers. One breath at a time. I spent the next hour pacing an alley near the hospital, trying to decide who to tell. Langley? No. The Berlin station? Hell no. Too many ears. Too many agendas. I had one name in mind, someone I trusted once. But even that felt like opening a door I couldn't close. So I told no one. Instead, I sat in my car with the keys in my lap and stared at the note until the ink started to bleed from my sweat. This wasn't protocol anymore. This was personal. I'd crossed that line, the one we always say we'll never cross, until someone looks up at you from a metal slab and twitches. I kept thinking about what it takes to fake your death. Not the logistics, but the psychology. The weight of shedding your name, your country, your orders. Walking out of cold storage like you never existed. I envied it. Just a little. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I sat by the window of a cheap, flat interior garden, the kind we used for dead drops and quiet disappearances. Every time a tram rolled by, I thought it might be him. And every time it wasn't, I hated myself for hoping. He wasn't just escaping someone, he was escaping everyone. Maybe even himself. And I was starting to understand why. The city's old veins were drawn in ink, not concrete. Back before the wall, we had maps of escape routes that never made it past briefing rooms. Sewer lines, maintenance tunnels, drainage shafts wide enough for a desperate man to crawl through. Most of them had been sealed after '61, but not all. Of them, I spent the night with those maps spread across my table like a seance. Lines faded, corners curled, coffee stains hiding junctions that no longer existed. I traced them with the side of my thumb, remembering the ones we used once, then. Never again. Routes drawn for emergencies, never meant to be revisited. One in particular kept pulling at me. Spree River access near the bridge, with a connection that ran straight under Kreuzberg and up through an abandoned tram station Görlitzer, closed since the late 50s. I remembered that route. I had drawn it myself in 1959. Andrei Sokolov had found it. He didn't need to ask where to go, he already knew. Or someone had told him. Someone who'd kept that map alive in memory, not on paper. That's when I realized this wasn't just escape. It was design. Someone had planned this. Maybe years ago. I took the keys the nurse gave me and went back. To the hospital, but not to search. I followed the west stairwell down, past where the floor plans ended. Maintenance level wasn't lit. Pipes dripped above me. Rats scattered before I stepped. The door at the far end had no label. The lock matched the key dot behind it. The tunnel, not lit, not marked. Just there, waiting. The walls were concrete, sweating, narrow. I walked maybe 30 meters before hitting a collapse intentional, judging by the blast residue. But it didn't matter. Sokolov was already gone. This was the start of something, not the end. And he was ahead of me. I stayed there longer than I should have, breathing stale air and watching for movement that never came. Something about the silence was too clean, too rehearsed, like someone had cleared the stage before I arrived. A ghost scene. When I finally turned back, I noticed something left on the wall near the exit, scratched into the grime with something sharp, maybe a wire or nail. A symbol, not Cyrillic, not ours either. Just a line, a circle, another line. I didn't recognize it. That scared me more than anything. Back in my flat, I lit a cigarette off the stove and stared out the window, replaying the route in my head. Spree to tunnel, tunnel to tram station. From there, the city opened. Kreuzberg was a mess of overlapping jurisdictions, American patrols, French oversight, local networks. If you wanted to disappear without leaving the West, that was the place. I called no one, filed nothing. Every instinct screamed that whoever planned this had done it with help, maybe ours, maybe theirs, maybe both. I wasn't looking at a defection. I was looking at an erasure, a surgical vanishing act. And now I was part of it. He knew those routes because someone taught him. I couldn't shake the feeling it might have been me. Sokolov was never just one man. That's what his file said. At least the long version, the one you only get if you've pissed off the right people and earned their silence. He was mimic trained, fluent in 4 accents, capable of facial control down to muscle memory. A walking mirror. They used him to impersonate defectors during prisoner exchanges, fake liaison officers in neutral embassies, even internal audits testing. Their own agents' loyalty by slipping in a face they thought they knew. He didn't have an identity. He had 5, maybe more. But none of them looked like the half-drowned face I'd seen by the spree. That one felt real. And I hated that I believed it. In 63, we'd intercepted a grainy photo of him walking out of a Yugoslav consulate. It had taken me 2 hours to convince Langley it was the same man from Minsk, just 10 pounds lighter and with a crooked tooth added. That's how deep his work went. He altered his own body to sell a lie. A man like that doesn't just vanish. He's vanished before he ever arrives. And yet, here he was. Exposed. Fragile. Human. I started rereading the older reports, the ones marked with quiet red stamps and folded too many times. Something didn't add up. There were patterns that felt wrong. Sokolov had been assigned to internal counterintel sweeps in 61, then suddenly disappeared after an operation in Bucharest, only to die months later in Minsk. The signatures on his death report matched a different hand than the intake forms. Even the coroner's name was one. We'd flagged a year prior for conflicting loyalties. So the question wasn't how Sokolov got out. Was who helped him get declared dead? Who forged the path that let him drift downriver like debris, only to surface in my city? That night, I couldn't sleep. I poured a glass of something strong and turned over the photo we'd once used to confirm his identity. The edges were worn, the ink bleeding. His eyes looked dead even then. Not from fear, from fatigue. Like he'd already lived through too many masks. The next morning, I found something waiting in my car. Neatly folded over the passenger seat was his coat, the same one he wore when they pulled him from the river. Dry now, and heavier than it should have been. I opened it slowly, hands shaking, heart pacing like boots on marble. Inside the breast pocket, nothing. Inside the lining, near the seam, something stitched tight. I cut it open with the edge of my keys, a folded piece of paper. Blank. Until I held it near the cigarette lighter. The heat brought out the message. inked in that strange blue that vanishes in cold and blooms in fire. I don't want to go back. Help me stay gone. Gone. No code, no location. Just that. A plea. Or a trap. Or both. Because if I could read it, others could too. Which meant either he was warning me or someone else was being invited in. I stared at the note until the flame singed the edge, then crushed it in my fist and let the ash fall between the seats. That coat, it wasn't just a message. It was a question. Was I willing to erase someone who didn't want to be found? Because to help a man like Sokolov disappear, ... meant I'd have to disappear a part of myself too. I didn't go into the office for 3 days. Officially, I was reviewing a backlog of internal reports. In reality, I was sitting in that flat with the coat draped over a kitchen chair, staring at it like it might speak. I didn't touch it again, not right away. It sat there like a guest that hadn't been invited, radiating something I didn't know how to name. Guilt, maybe? Or anticipation. The note inside had already burned in my ashtray, reduced to flakes that floated when the heater clicked on. But the words didn't go with it. I don't want to go back. I kept hearing them in the steam of the kettle, in the scratch of my razor, in the pause before the radio settled into a signal. Help me stay gone. I started checking for tails. I switched cabs twice on the way to the market. Spoke German with a Polish accent when I bought cigarettes. Left the flat through the rear stairwell and walked 4 blocks before circling back. But no one followed. That worried me more. If I wasn't being watched, it meant either I wasn't on the radar or I'd already been written off. The coat held more than the note. I knew that. So I searched it again. Pockets, seams, buttons twice. Nothing. But then I looked at the lining again, where the note had been sewn. There, stitched in almost invisible thread, was a series of numbers. Not coordinates, not timestamps, just 5 digits. Repeated twice dotted. Hit me hours later, an internal file code used by our own courier network. One that had been discontinued after the East Berlin leak in '62. Each code led to a physical drop. Dead letter boxes hidden in places most people forgot existed. The rim of a urinal in a closed cinema. A loose brick in a condemned bakery. A trash chute on a floor that no longer had tenants. This one pointed to a locker in the cellar of a boarding school that had been bombed out during the war and never reopened. I hadn't thought about that place in years. It was just ruins now, but maybe that's exactly why he chose it. I went alone. Dusk was closing in, and the cold had settled into the bones of the city. The building was half collapsed, overgrown. The cellar door barely held. I forced it open with a crowbar, careful not to leave marks. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something older. I found the locker behind a rotted piano. The key was his. Already in it, inside, a single Polaroid, wrapped in plastic dot. It showed a man face obscured by shadows standing beside a burned-out car in what looked like rural Hungary. Written on the back, in the same blue ink I'd seen react to the lighter, was one sentence. They killed the wrong double. I stood there with that photo in my hand, heart like a fist, lungs tight. This wasn't just about running away. Sokolov had been someone's pawn, and when he stepped out of line, they killed his reflection instead of him. And now he was trying to burn the board altogether. That message, hidden in his own coat, wasn't just a request. It was a dare. Help me vanish. Or report me and become part of what buried me the first time. I left the school through the back, walking slower now. Not because I had answers, but because I finally understood the question. What if this wasn't defection? What if it was confession? And what if I was the only one left who still cared to hear it? Langley didn't care about the coat or the Polaroid. or the fact that I hadn't filed a single official report in nearly a week. What they cared about was the cable I sent encrypted, brief and just cautious enough to sound procedural. Possible movement on former KGB asset. Identity requires confirmation. Maybe a resurfaced double. I waited for a response. 2 days. Nothing. Then it came. One line. If asset is verified alive, disclose location for recovery. Recovery. That was their word for extraction, interrogation, and if the math didn't add up, removal. No trial. No flags. Just ... deletion. I stared at that line for a long time. Read it again. And again. It didn't matter what Sokolov had done, or why he ran. As far as the agency was concerned, he was a loose filament sparking near gasoline, too volatile to preserve, too informed to ignore. I wasn't being asked to make contact. I was being asked to set the crosshairs. The strange part? I wasn't angry. Not at them. This was the job. We erased problems, sometimes before they were even confirmed. I'd done it before, quietly, efficiently. You learn to carry the weight by forgetting where you picked it up. But this time, it didn't. Settle dot this time. The order felt like it had already been written before I'd even seen the man's face. I sat in a cafe near Alexanderplatz, watching people move like ants through glass. My contact hadn't shown. That made 3 missed meets. Either he was dead, or he'd flipped sides. Either way, I was on my own. I lit a cigarette with the lighter that had revealed Sokolov's note. I held the flame a little longer this time, until the metal burned my thumb, just to see if I could still feel it. I was told once, back in training, that every operative has. One ghost. One man or woman they couldn't let go of, couldn't kill, couldn't save. I'd always figured mine was buried in Prague or Frankfurt, but maybe not. Maybe mine had just handed me his coat and asked for mercy. I started mapping out options, not for extraction, for disappearance. Not theirs. His dot, but every route I plotted ended in a lie. Forged documents, altered scans, corrupt border agents who owed me favors. A dead man was easier to move than a live one. That's the cruel truth of our trade. The paperwork's cleaner when the subject doesn't breathe dot by midnight. I had a plan. Not a good one, but better than nothing. Sokolov could be smuggled through Switzerland under the name Olav Henriksen. Norwegian heritage, medical evacuation clearance. Eyes forward, voice low. It could work if he stayed quiet, if no one asked questions, if I sold it well enough to believe it myself. But I knew the second I hit send on that cable, everything changed. I wrote the message anyway. Asset located. Will confirm viability. Coordinates pending. Not false, not true. A delay. One last breath of time before the storm got. As I left the safe house that night, I found something taped to inside of my car window. No note. Just an old tram token one that hadn't been valid since 1958. I knew what it meant. He was ready to meet, but not as Sokolov dot, and not as a man waiting to be saved. He wanted to disappear for good, and I was the only one left with the hands to bury him. He was already there when I arrived, hunched near what used to be track 3, now just weeds and broken glass beneath the ghost of a ceiling. The Anhalter ruins had once been the pride of the city-ornate stone arches, vaulted halls, trains humming in and out like veins feeding a heart. Now it was a carcass, fitting place for a meeting between 2 men who weren't supposed to exist anymore. He didn't look up when I stepped into the shadow of what remained of the east wall. Just sat there with his coat wrapped tight and a blanket over his knees, like an old man waiting for a train that no longer ran. His hair was longer, face gaunt, eyes dull but awake. Awake in the way A soldier's eyes stay open after the shooting stops, just to be sure. I don't know who I am anymore. He said, voice dry, almost brittle. They broke it. Whatever it was, I didn't ask who they were. He wouldn't have answered. He told me he hadn't been Soviet for a long time. Said it like a confession, not a declaration. Said he hadn't spoken Russian in over a year, not even in his head. That his dreams were in German now, or sometimes Hungarian. That he stopped, trusting mirrors. I asked him what he wanted. He didn't hesitate. A passport, a name, a door out. He didn't ask for safety. He asked for disappearance. The kind that doesn't end with a medal or a trial or a new assignment. The kind where no one looks twice when you order a coffee or bury yourself in snow. I can't kill anymore, he added. Not even by silence. We sat in the ruins while the city coughed through twilight. I didn't offer him hope. Just a sandwich and a cigarette. He took both like he hadn't held something warm in weeks. I told him I could get him a route. Not perfect, not clean, but possible. Vienna, maybe. Or through Denmark. He nodded like he'd already been there and was just waiting for someone else to say it out loud. Before we left, he handed me something. A folded slip of paper wrapped in old wax cloth. Inside, a drawing. Crude, but clear. A room, a chair. A set of tools. Too clean. Too exact. A scene he wanted me to understand. I was the one who cleaned up afterward, he whispered. Not the torturer, the eraser. He said it without shame. Without pride. Just fact. And then he said it again. I can't go back to being that. We parted near a broken pillar. He told me to leave first. Said he'd follow once the square was empty. I walked away, not looking back. Not until I heard the soft clang of a rail fragment being kicked in the dark. I turned. He was gone. Only this drawing remained in my pocket, pressed between my fingers like a question I hadn't asked. And for the first time, I started to wonder, maybe this wasn't about escape anymore. Maybe it was about burial. It started with a phone that rang once and stopped. Then again, an hour later, no one on the line. Just the static you learn to recognize, not malfunction, but surveillance. The kind that doesn't record for evidence, just for positioning. To measure the moment you answer. Or flinch the next. Morning, I spotted them. Not one tail. 3, not ours. Not just theirs either. A West German car idling half a block down. 2 French agents pretending to argue over a map near a tram stop. And one of ours, Langley, Berlin sector, buying a pretzel and not eating it. Someone had leaked. The operation. The asset. Maybe even my name. I wasn't being consulted anymore. I was being monitored, managed, contained. That night, I changed addresses. Twice. Burned the clothes I'd worn during the last meeting with Sokolov. Switched to a new coat. Not for warmth, just for the illusion of anonymity. It was too late. Whatever lines I thought I was navigating were gone. I wasn't a handler now. I was an accomplice. Or worse, a liability. I didn't contact him. Didn't leave a signal. But the next morning, there was a matchbox in my mailbox. Plain. From a bar that had been shut down in '61. Inside, not matches. Just a scrap of cloth. Bloodstained, torn from the same coat he'd left in my car. It wasn't a threat. It was a message. He was bleeding. Still moving. Still not caught, but not far. I sat in the corner booth of a train station cafe with a note in my lap, folded inside a newspaper. I counted every man who entered, measured every glance. Waited for someone to sit down and say my name. No one did. And that's when it hit me. They weren't coming for him anymore. They were coming for me. I had become the bottleneck. The only man standing between a ghost and the vacuum that wanted to erase him. If I helped him again, I was aiding an enemy. If I turned him in, I was surrendering to a machine that no longer cared about truth-only control. I started rehearsing. Lies, ones I could tell under pressure, ones that might save my skin. But none of them sounded true. Even to me. I called in one last favor a contact in Copenhagen who owed me blood and silence. I told him to prepare a crossing. No names. Number. Questions. Just a window of 48 hours. I packed light. Just one bag. No files, no notes. Burned the Polaroid. Shredded the map. Every piece of Sokolov I still carried had to disappear. All except the coat that I wore. By nightfall, I wasn't sure who they were after anymore. Him or the part of me that still believed he deserved to vanish on his own terms. And I didn't know which one they'd shoot first. The passport came from a man in a wheelchair who'd once worked for both sides and trusted neither. He lived in a basement beneath a shuttered photography shop, walls lined with negatives of people who'd long stopped showing up in mirrors. He didn't speak unless paid in advance. In cigarettes. American ones. I gave him everything I had owed. Favors, quiet debts, a contact in Lisbon who owed me one last clearance code. In exchange, he handed me a thin folder, unmarked. Inside, Olav Henriksson, Norwegian, born in Mount, residency, Vienna. Occupation, civil engineer, retired. Medical note, chronic vertigo enough to justify keeping his head down, avoiding eye. Contact, asking others to read signs for him. It was perfect and painfully expensive. I left the shop with empty pockets and a hollow chest. For a second, I didn't know if I did it for Sokolov or for me. Maybe I needed to prove that I could still pull one last miracle without selling my soul completely. Maybe I wanted to save something that wasn't a report, a code, a lead. Just a man. When I met him at the drop, he was thinner, limping slightly, eyes shadowed. He took the folder like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Didn't open it, just nodded. Thank you, he said. It wasn't gratitude. It was surrender. We sat in silence on a bench outside the Tiergarten, like old men feeding ghosts. I handed him the rest. Train schedule, forged tickets, a transit pass marked with a symbol only the old network would recognize. He scanned it, all once, and said nothing. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, small, precise. He didn't speak as he gave it to me. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a watch, German-made, stopped at 3:12, the same time they'd declared him dead in Minsk. This belonged to the double, he said finally. I took it off his wrist before the explosion. They thought it was me. Buried him with my name. He looked away. I've worn it ever since. But I don't want to know what time it is anymore. I held it in my palm. The second hand didn't move. It never would. We didn't say goodbye. There's no word for what we were doing. It wasn't escape. It wasn't absolution. It was severance. I walked away first. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care. Because I couldn't afford to watch him disappear one more time. We met for the last time under the awning of Zuligischer Garten Station. Rain tapped softly on the metal above, but neither of us flinched. He looked different, now cleaner, steadier. The kind of man who might board a train and never be noticed, never remembered. A man ready to vanish properly. He wore the new identity. Like a second skin, Olav Henriksson. I had memorized every line of that file, but now it felt like he had too. He didn't smile. He didn't fidget. Just stood there, holding one small box wrapped in waxed paper. For you, he said. No emotion. No explanation. I opened it. Inside, a film reel. 8mm, unlabeled. I looked up. He spoke before I could ask. It's real, he said. They made me watch. I don't want justice. I just want someone else to know. I didn't need to ask what it was. I'd heard whispers about Soviet footage interrogation. Rooms turned theaters of cruelty, experiments labeled retraining, procedures that blurred into madness. But this was proof. Something they couldn't erase without killing every copy. Something that had turned Sokolov's stomach. Enough to defect. Or maybe not defect, maybe just escape. He stepped back toward the platform, but paused. I kept it as insurance. Then I kept it as guilt. He looked at me like a man trying to remember his own reflection. You were the only one who didn't look away. A train rolled in, thunder in a cage. He didn't rush. Just walked toward. The door merged into the crowd and disappeared behind the blur of glass and steam. I waited until the train was gone. The box still in my hand, heavier now. Back at the flat, I threaded the reel through an old projector. No sound, just images. A concrete room. Men strapped down. Instruments I didn't recognize. Eyes wide, mouths open. Too open, the kind of thing. That doesn't need a translator. I didn't finish it. Halfway through, I shut it off. Sat in the dark. There are things you carry because you have to. And things you carry because someone asked you to, and you were too tired to say no. That reel wasn't leverage. It wasn't strategy. It was Sokolov's last breath. His way of saying, this is why. The train he boarded left Berlin at 1804. It crossed into the zone at 21:17. By midnight, it was snowing in Vienna, and I never saw him again. There are days when I think I see him crossing a street in Prague, buying fruit in a Swedish market, sitting alone on a bench in a Belgian train station, staring at nothing, waiting for a train that doesn't come. But maybe that's just the part of me that wants to believe he made it. That all of this coats, tunnels, dead doubles, and silent. Reels wasn't just the last flicker of a man too tired to fight another war. He never contacted me again. No postcards. No code words. Not even a loose page in a hollow book at the second-hand shop in Tiergarten. That's how I knew he'd done. It right dot when a man disappears properly. He doesn't leave echoes. Just a weight in the chest of someone who still remembers the sound of his voice. The agency never asked again. Not officially. But things changed. A few doors closed to me. A few faces looked a little longer than they used to. I wasn't reassigned, but I was repositioned, quietly, like a tool someone no longer trusted but didn't know how to throw away. I kept the reel. I never showed it. That would have made it propaganda or evidence. Sokolov didn't want justice. He wanted silence. And I was the last man alive who understood why. The coat he gave me, still hanging in my closet, smells like smoke and river water. I don't wear it, but I don't throw it out either. There's something about the weight of it. Sometimes I hear the tick again. That twitch beneath his left eye. It shows up in strangers, in mirrors, in me. In this war, no one dies completely. Some just stop answering to their names. He did, and maybe I did too. Now I sit in rooms and listen. That's all I know how to do anymore. Watch people leave, memorize their backs, guess what they're running from. Sometimes someone says a name I haven't heard in years, and I pretend I don't recognize it because I'm not supposed to, because I don't want to, because I do. The reel's still in my drawer, wrapped in the same cloth he gave me, untouched since that night. I think about burning it sometimes, but I never do. Not because I need it, because I owe it. I walk slower now. Forget names, forget places, but I remember him, not the spy, not the double, the man who asked to vanish and trusted me to make it stick. Berlin's changed. The station's gone. The tunnels are sealed, but some routes don't need maps. They live in muscle memory, in silence, in coats never claimed. I wonder, sometimes, if he ever took on a new name. If anyone ever called him Olav and meant it. Or if he just disappeared into the noise like we all tried to. There's a phrase I heard once, carved into a wall in a dead place. Some ghosts still bleed. I think he did. Maybe I do too. If you're still here, subscribe and leave a comment. If you ever heard stories like this, whispered in your city, I want to know who else remembers ghosts like him.